course, is the great Paul McCartney.
Welcome to Expert Minutes. I'm John Hambone McGuire.
This conversation
Sweet, juicy. Where did that word come from?
I don't know.
Bet you never thought you'd hear that on the radio.
Welcome to Podcast Radio. I'm Graham Mack, and I'm so glad that worked. I was just talking to Owen about this beforehand. That's the first time I've tried that, to come straight in with that, and I managed to pull it off. So that is good news. Right, what you're watching now is the raw interview for the Pod 20. I present the Pod 20, the countdown of the top podcasts in the world, and I have guest podcasters on. Now, the audio is edited, and because it's for radio and we've got to get it into the chart and everything. But we do this live on YouTube so that you can see the raw, unedited version with the guests that I talk to. Special guest this time round, it's Owen Ralph, who is a musician, a multi-instrumentalist, a digital content producer. He's an integral part of the team that's responsible for the podcast, the folk music podcast, Folk on Foot. Owen Ralph, welcome to Podcast Radio.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the latest award for Folk on Foot. What was that? Was the British Podcasting Awards, was it?
Yeah, we got a nomination for that one. It was for Best Lockdown Podcast, which, fingers crossed, that's the last time that category is going to come up. But yeah, and that was specifically for the Folk on Foot festivals that we did, which were these kind of 7-hour-long streams, which we put on the podcast, but also on YouTube, of musicians largely playing from home during the various lockdowns we've had. And yeah, the whole idea of those was to raise money for, half went to the performers and half went to the charity Help Musicians. And yeah, we did 4 of those over the kind of the time that we were locked down, and raised was 320 something thousand pounds. I should have shared that.
Nice one. No, that's good. That's good. That's a hell of a 300,000.
Yeah, £320,000.
Goodness me, that's a lot of money out of 4 podcasts. Wow.
Yeah, well, it was when we were first coming up with the idea of the first one, Matthew Bannister, who presents the podcast, he initially wanted to set the target at 5,000, and I said that's too high. We should really set it at 2,000. Otherwise, this is going to look really bad if we don't hit it. And then yeah, that first one got to 100,000, which we weren't expecting in the slightest.
Wow. So Matthew Bannister, now people will know Matthew Bannister. He's got the reputation from when he was in charge of Radio 1 and what happened with Chris Evans on Breakfast and everything. But what people forget about Matthew Bannister, or people who don't know his work as well, they only know it from the headlines and that, is they know him from his management work. They don't seem to know him from, he's a great broadcaster and a great interviewer. What's he like to work with?
He's amazing, really, to be honest. I feel like I mean, it sounds a bit cliche to say it, but I genuinely feel I've learned an awful lot just through working with him on this. And he's the kind of person as well who, if he comes up with an idea, it's normally a good idea to follow through on it. Like, even if it sounds like totally off the wall. I mean, the festivals were
that was his
example.
Idea. Yeah, to do
an
the
online
whole festival.
Yeah. Although everything we've done with Folk on Foot, it's very much his project and his baby, and I've been just here to help make it happen.
I think it's the perfect partnership, you and him, because Folk on Foot, it's about folk music, but he chats to folk artists, musicians, but on foot. Like, it might be on a beach, or he might be walking through a park, or some wilderness area, and his background is broadcasting, but your background is as a musician. And you need to have both ends of that for the thing to work. So how did you get together with him then?
Well, so the podcast started, it was running for about a year before I got involved. But I was doing my own podcast at the time, which was just a kind of 6-episode series called Future Proof Folk, where I was just interviewing various people who were working on projects which I thought were interesting within the folk scene in a way that might future-proof the scene, for want of a better term. Because there's always the worries about aging audiences and falling behind to technology or whatever it might be. So I was speaking to various people who were doing interesting things that were really keeping folk music in the modern day and kind of equipped to keep going into the future. And someone who was doing PR for the podcast actually got in touch with me and said, would I like to interview Matthew for my podcast?
Right.
I said, yeah, great.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Good guest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've emailed him as well, but I think it's gone into his junk. So
quite possibly.
I
we
will
have a vicious spam filter at Folk on Foot.
But now that you're on, I'm going to have to wait a few weeks to get him on, because otherwise we'll only have Folk on Foot people on the show. You know what I mean?
I'd be happy with that.
Right. So it was because you were already doing, or you'd had experience of a podcast, and then of course there's your musical background as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Matthew's got a bit of a musical background as well. I mean, obviously,
Has he?
working
What
in
is
radio.
it? What is it?
He played the fiddle growing up. I mean, he's never. I don't think he's ever kind of been a professional musician or whatever. But when he was 17, he was in a band, and when he does his live talks, he likes to bring out a little radio clip of him playing in a trio, doing a version of "I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight" by Richard Thompson.
Right.
Which is yeah. So he's very much got a folk music background, even though his as you mentioned before, his best known professional area is in Radio 1, which is quite a long way from folk music in many ways.
So what is folk music? How do you define it?
Yeah, that is the big question. I've shifted a lot in my views on this, because when I was first kind of properly getting kind of obsessively into folk music, when I was mostly when I was in university, really, I was already kind of into it, but I was writing a dissertation on folk music and kind of how we imagine it to be. So I always used to take quite a hardline view that it's it's kind of traditional songs. It's songs where the original author is lost to history and it's been passed down orally.
Okay.
And it's all about the material. It's not so much about you can play it on an electric guitar or a fiddle or sing it a cappella, whatever you want, but it's all about the material. But I've shifted a lot on that now. I mean, partly because I'm not doing so much academic work. I don't need to be so rigorous in my definitions, but also just because I think it's really unhelpful to draw lines like that when there are so many amazing singer-songwriters out there, or people who do a bit of traditional, a bit of songwriting, who don't necessarily fall into that definition of traditional.
So there aren't rules, because Dylan got a lot of hassle in the 60s when he went electric. I mean,
yeah.
What can you be a folk musician and play electric now?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean,
Okay.
I think the people who demonstrate this best is there's a band called False Lights, which is a collaboration of two folk musicians, Jim Morey and Sam Carter, and a band around them, and they play all kind of traditional songs, but as a rock band, distorted electric guitars. They're properly going for it.
Wow.
And I think in many ways that band just kind of it serves as a great example of how you can't really draw lines around this stuff,
Right?
Because there's the sound and there's the material, and they can both go in like very interesting directions. And yeah, as soon as you start to draw boundaries, you always get exceptions, and everything gets blurred until you don't know what you're looking at anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the northwest of England, where up there, folk music was like the Lancashire hand-on-the-ear folk singers in folk clubs, and they took it very, very seriously. They were very earnest about it. I'm sure they had fun as well, but that was the impression I got. So I was a bit, folk music, not into it. But then when I heard about this Dylan thing, and they're going, oh, Dylan's folk music. Okay, well, now I see, the early Dylan stuff with just him and the guitar and the harmonica. Okay, so that's folk music. But then I really love blues, and blues is folk music too. So does that mean that skiffle was folk music, which is what gave birth to rock and roll and the Beatles in particular?
Yeah,
Does
I think
that
there's a
well, I
strong
suppose it
argument
came
that
from, Lonnie Donegan was the big one. Was he a folk singer?
I mean, yeah, again, you could definitely argue it. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about a bit lately, because about this time last year, English Folk Expo, in collaboration with the official charts company, launched the official folk albums chart.
Right.
And Folk on Foot have been doing a monthly chart show of the folk albums chart. And the question you have to answer as soon as you do anything like that is what do we include in this folk albums chart? What is a folk album? And most months, really, there's a little bit of discussion on Twitter about, should that album have been included? Should it not? But yeah, and that for that show, it's just decided by a panel at the official charts company. But for me nowadays, I think of it very much as, what could you conceivably have at a folk festival? What would make a coherent event?
Yeah.
And as long as you can pull together something which makes sense, I think it's, and particularly when we're thinking about encouraging younger up and coming artists, it's far more beneficial to everyone if we take a much more liberal view of what folk music is than trying to close it down and say, no, you're not included.
Right.
You can't play at that
So
festival.
that militant element that was upset with Dylan going electric, they're not around anymore.
There are still some
Are
around
there?
like that. Yeah, and there's a point to it at which it's a fair argument where someone might say, I enjoy someone like Martin Carthy, who played. He's the father of folk guitar, really. Since the 60s, and he plays traditional songs, and he kind of invented the guitar style, which a lot of people have mimicked since then. People say, I like that, but I don't like a modern singer-songwriter today, and that is fine, and it's understandable that people want to put kind of listen to one and not the other and draw a distinction between the two.
Yeah.
But as I say, I don't think that distinction is helpful for the industry in general and for supporting younger artists.
Yeah, because there's a couple of people, massive in the comedy world that got their start in folk. Obviously, Billy Connolly with the Humble Bums, and Mike Harding as well was a folk singer, probably still is. And
Yeah.
they went to comedy, so it can't be full of totally serious people. It's been the breeding ground for so many big comedians.
Yeah. And I mean, Mike Harding has always, he used to do the folk show on Radio 2, and now he's got his own folk podcast. And I think he's someone who is great at supporting a really wide range of what some people may or may not call folk music. He's been great for championing people like that.
Okay. Now, you're an arts marketer and digital content producer. Digital
Yes.
content producer, I kind of understand, because that's podcasts. Well, it's not just podcasts, because you've done a how to do digital video series for musicians. So what is an arts marketer? And do I have what I want to know what it is that makes you an arts marketer and digital content producer. And I lifted that off the Folk on Foot website, so I haven't made it up. This is what you describe yourself as.
It's a collection of words that I've kind of settled on when I needed to find some kind of description of what I do.
What does it mean? Because I mean, there's a certain amount of marketing involved in digital content production, I suppose, because that's why you're doing it.
Yeah, well, I guess the marketing side is, so my whole career really has been in marketing and communications for music venues and arts organisations and music charities, and so I've spent a lot of time kind of doing social media and email marketing and making leaflets and things. So kind of just doing trying to tell people about what's happening and why they should get involved.
Yeah.
So maybe arts communications might even be a better term. I don't know if it's any less confusing.
Okay. Yeah. You're saying the how to do digital video series that helps musicians to optimize their digital channels. How do musicians do that? Because and particularly during lockdown, that was where it was at, and it still is where it's at, because live has still not got back to where it was. How do musicians optimize their digital channels?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky one. So that series was commissioned by English Folk Expo as a part of their Folk Talk program, where they basically got a lot of people in the folk music industry to create videos about kind of their areas of expertise, just to try and help musicians to develop their skills during that time when they couldn't be out and about performing.
And is it things like this? Is it things like YouTube Live? Is that count as part of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think for the big thing I'm always telling people at the moment is it's about balancing what you have time to do and what you think is going to like help you specifically achieve your goals as a musician.
Yeah.
Because you could go crazy and do like have your TikToks and your Instagram and Twitter and spend hours and hours doing all of those.
Yeah.
Exactly, and then you have no time to actually do your music. And I've like as someone who does that kind of thing day to day as my job, I find it keeps me busy enough. And then when there's someone who's actually trying to make a living from their music on top of it, I think it would just be so much work. So it's about really trying to work out what you're trying to do, which tools are kind of the best suited to helping you do that, and then trying to fit it into what you're doing already. So if you already enjoy kind of recording yourself playing music at home or whatever, use that, put it out on your channels, use it to promote yourself. So it's all that kind of thing, and just trying to get yourself out there as best you can without letting the marketing take over your life.
Yeah. There's a lady in America. I don't know whether you describe it as folk music or not, and I'll probably say her name wrong. I think her name is Lana Del Cid or something like that. Anyway, and she just does one song on a Sunday afternoon in California that they put online every Sunday. Mm. And that's all she does, but it's massive on YouTube. But she's managed to hone it down to that one thing. But she does it every week on a Sunday. I think she might do it on a Sunday morning, and then by the time it's edited up and all the sounds mixed and everything. But yeah, I see. Yeah, it'd be hard to know. Well, you've just got to know what your thing is and how to exploit it best, I suppose.
Yeah, and those kind of regular things like that, where you say like, okay, every Sunday I'm going to stream a song.
Yeah.
Even just something like that is really useful, because then you don't have to plan. Like you need to work out what you're going to play, but like Sunday stream a song.
Toya does one. I don't think you describe that as folk music either, but Toya does one every weekend. I forget which day. I think it's Sundays. Yeah, and that's a good little trick. Give them like an appointment to listen, as we used to say in commercial radio. I don't know if they still say that anymore. And you grew up in Wales?
I did, yes.
So you don't sound that Welsh.
No. Yeah, it's odd, really. So I spent the first 18 years of my life in the Welsh Valleys in South Wales.
Whereabouts?
I just never picked up the accent. It was just outside Caerphilly.
Okay, because my wife's family are all from Newport, although she was born in New Zealand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a couple of train stops away from where my parents were. But yeah, because both my parents were English, and they moved to Wales when they got married. And even my mum in particular now has quite a Welsh accent, having lived there for 30 years or however long it's been. Did
you lose it or not have it in the first place?
I just never had it in the first place. I think I grew up talking like my parents, who did still have English accents at that point. And I don't know, there was an annoying part of me, I think, quite enjoyed that I sounded a bit different to the rest of the kids at my school. And I just kind of lent into it. But I don't really know why.
You didn't get a hard time for that? Because, Plaid Cymru are not quite as militant as they used to be, but they used to burn down holiday homes that the English were. I mean, they haven't done that for a long, long time, and it was probably only a handful of them that did that, just to make it clear. But you didn't get a hard time for being English in Wales, even though
not particularly. I mean, other kids at school used to tell me that I sounded posh,
right?
But I didn't really mind that. They said what I wanted. But no, I mean, and the community we grew up in, it's an ex coal mining community. Back in the early 20th century, it was all coal mining. Yeah. But no, it's always been a lovely community. I never remotely felt there that we were in any way kind of shunned, because
there's a lot of very successful people come from that part of the world. Tom Jones and Richard Burton are all from South Wales. Shirley Bassey. I mean, there's an incredible amount of talent come out of that area. It's funny you should say you sounded posh. I had Anthony Davis on the show. He does a podcast called 5 Minute News, and he's a voiceover artist and actor, and he used to be the voice of the Royal Variety Show, and he's the Lottery and all sorts of things like that. And he had a very basic education, but he went for elocution lessons. And he says, people waste all this money on university. All you really need in Britain is to have elocution lessons, and everyone will think that you're really well educated and really smart. And he says he's not really that well educated and not really as smart as people think he is, but he just speaks very well. So maybe you were up to the same thing.
Quite possibly, yeah.
What music were you listening to as a kid growing up in Wales then?
It was largely, I think, from about the age of 10 or so was when I was kind of particularly getting into music. And I was mostly kind of listening to. I mean, I grew up with a bit of a church background, so it was a lot of like Christian contemporary music and kind of rock music from that.
Right.
Kind
So
of
you weren't going
genre.
to chapel, as they say in Wales. It was more contemporary than that.
It was somewhere in the middle. We had it was a piano rather than an organ, but it wasn't kind of like one of the kind of American mega church.
There was a piano in the house.
There was a piano in the church. We
I
had
see.
a piano
Okay.
had a piano in the house when I was very small, but it was crazy out of tune, and we
Yeah,
eventually got
okay,
rid of it
yeah.
because nobody
Right.
could really play it.
Right. So it was in church, right? So
Yeah, and actually a lot of my where I learned to actually play and perform was within the church setting actually. So when I was in my mid-teens, I think it was, I took over as the pianist at church, and I was almost entirely self-taught on piano. I'd had a couple of lessons in school, but yeah, it just kind of it's interesting putting yourself in that situation where, you know, I have to get through this song now because there are 50 people there who
Yeah.
want to sing it.
I've been in many bands through the years, just cover bands playing in pubs, nothing special, but not bragging. But we always said, you know, a gig is worth like, you know, a month of rehearsal. It's just because the pressure's on. You whatever happens, you got to keep it going. Yeah, and you can rehearse for weeks, and you do one gig, and all of a sudden you're a tight band. Up until then, you just couldn't really get it consistently together. But yeah, I know what you mean. Just having that, you've got to deliver when there's something you're being judged. Yeah. So that was good experience. So young. So piano was the first instrument for you.
Well, I kind of picked up a handful of things in school.
Yeah,
so
because
I
you play a hell of a lot of different and varied, from woodwind to stringed instrument, all sorts. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I started recorder, as most people do, as a little
Playing
kid,
Bobby
but then-
Shafto. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But then, yeah,
London's
when I
Burning.
was about 8, I picked up violin, bassoon, and guitar, all kind of around the same time.
Right.
So it kind of grew from when I was playing recorder. You know, there are lots of different sizes of recorder that you can get, and when I discovered that, I was like, okay, I need to collect all the different sizes of recorders. So I got about half a dozen of them. And then I thought, I don't just want recorders, I want all the instruments. I want like a full orchestra in my bedroom. So I jumped at every chance to learn an instrument. And you know, as I got older, I started, you know, just buying instruments when if I saw it. There was one time I bought an erhu, which is like a Chinese 2-string violin thing, just because I saw one on eBay for like 10 quid. I thought, this would be worth a go. I never made a good sound out of it. I mean, partly because it cost 10 quid. But yeah, that was,
but
I was very much more...
if it's a Chinese instrument to a Western ear, it probably never made a good sound anyway. I don't
Quite
know.
possibly, yeah.
I'm not putting down that kind of music, but you know, certain music doesn't translate well at first until you get your head around the scales of the thing and that. Wow. Yeah. Right, because the recorder's a good one to start with, isn't it? Because I think, from what I understand, the positions on it are similar to other woodwind instruments, even the bagpipes. If you can play the recorder, you can work it all out, can't you? With the B being like that and the A being there, it's all the same. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that was the reason I picked up, you know, a handful of woodwind instruments was exactly that, because once you can get a sound out of it, the finger positions are not exactly the same, but, you know, as you say, very comparable. You've got the basic positions are all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's. I think it wasn't a conscious decision, but I think it was a good idea that I picked up violin, guitar, and bassoon at the same time, because that gave me the core skills for 3 quite different types of instrument, which I could then just, you know, run off with and pick up all the other variations.
And to me, the bassoon is one I know nothing about. Violin, okay, I'm familiar with, and guitar, I play a bit of rhythm guitar, but the bassoon, isn't that kind of like a tuba of the woodwind? You know, it's almost like bass lines. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why were you attracted to that?
It was so I had a teacher called Phil Edwards who he was always one of my big musical influences growing up. He used to he played the button melodeon in assembly instead of or he played piano as well, but he'd play squeeze boxes and he had bagpipes and he had like all the different recorders as well. And he was always very encouraging of me. And when I was I must have been 8, and we had a wind quintet come and play an assembly, as sometimes you do, you get random musical ensembles coming in for no apparent reason. And yeah, he just came up to me afterwards and said, just if you wanted to play one of those instruments, which one would it be? And I'd never even heard of a bassoon before, but, seeing it there and this massive piece of wood, I was like, oh, I'd love to play one of those, but obviously I'm really tiny, I'm only 8. And he made some phone calls and got me this mini bassoon, which is about, I don't know, a meter long. And yeah, because he used to play bassoon as well, so he was he kind of lit up when I said that. And yeah, so I just
and he's got like another one of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you need people like that, don't you? It's like being introduced to a particular genre of music. You need like a cooler older cousin, or in some cases, if you've got an older brother, then there's a bit of an age gap that can introduce. Oh no, you've got to listen to this. This is and kind of bring you in. And it sounds like he was doing the same with the instruments. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean, you were reading music as well. You can read charts.
Yeah, so that was something I started learning right from the beginning when I picked up a recorder.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been an incredibly useful skill. And particularly the way I create music now, I'm very much kind of I will write out a score and then record that rather than kind of
you'll do the whole arrangement on paper first.
Yeah, well, the music I make these days is it's kind of written for a little chamber orchestra with kind of electronics and a bit of a rhythm section. And so yeah, my initial idea was I'd just pick a selection of instruments that I could already play, and then I would I'd score it all out and record it because
so you hear it in your head as you write it down. You know what goes where.
Yeah,
and what sounds good with what.
Yeah, I think orchestration is it's probably the thing I would say I'm best at, even though it's something I only really do for myself these days. But I mean, once I kind of know how a song should go and how it's going to be structured, I just kind of sit down and it just comes out. I think it's that ridiculous thing where a lot of people say with songwriting that it comes, it's just inspiration strikes, or it comes from God, or whatever term they tend to use.
It comes through you.
Yeah, but it sounds ridiculous, but it is literally that I just sit down at the computer and it just happens. I don't let my mind get in the way too much. Yeah. I think, and it's just that thing I think of having listened to so much music and thought about music so much for my entire life. It just happens now. It's yeah. So like people are with painting, I guess. If you've been painting all your life, you just sit down and paint. You don't need to.
It's the way. With any artist, it's whichever form of art it is. It's the way they express themselves and communicate the feelings and the emotion. And it is something very special when you get someone like you who knows exactly what they're doing and knows how to put that across. Is that what the new album is then? Tell me about the new album.
Yeah, so
Imprint. It's called Imprint. Is the new album? The new album is called Imprint, and it's by Owen Ralph.
Yes, it's out on the 12th of November.
There you go.
And it's so it's a continuation of what I've been doing with the 2 EPs that I've released over the past couple of years. And yeah, it's traditional songs, it's broadside ballads, and art songs. So just songs that I found sheet music lying around for, which seem to be out of copyright, and I can't really find anything like any other versions of them.
Good trick.
Yeah, exactly. So I just orchestrate those. Recorded them up in Sheffield with an amazing guy called Tom Wright. That was back in September last year. And yeah, it's coming out in November. It's kind of there's a loose theme to it of so the word imprint, I'm kind of interpreting it in lots of ways. There's the idea with traditional song that when it's passed down orally, that each singer leaves their mark on it because there's slight changes.
Yeah.
So there's that imprint. There's the songs that have left their imprint on me. So for example, some of the songs that I was learning on recorder actually from Phil Edwards,
So Bobby
sort of-
Shafto's not on there, or London's Burning, but yeah, other stuff.
No, but tunes from that period of my life are, yeah, they kind of stuck with me all that time. Yeah, and then there are songs as well which kind of deal with the moments in your life which leave their imprint on you. So I mean, there's a song about building a ship and sailing away because your girlfriend's left you, and just those those kind of really human moments of breakups or whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, all told through these kind of old traditional songs.
It's great that we live in an age where you can just get on and do that, because, years ago people would have to get a deal with the record company and book studio time and everything. But now it's accessible to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been amazing really. And my whole, I think when I was about 13, I just found I think it was in a bookshop actually. For some reason, it was this kit with a really cheap microphone and some basic audio editing software. And I just bought that and started recording my own music and just haven't really stopped since then. And yeah, it's been such a it's been my big hobby for most of my life now.
Yeah, no, it's
I don't know what I
totally
would've-
changed. I remember
Yeah.
the first multi-track recorder I had. It was a second-hand one. It was made by Tascam. I don't know if you're old enough to remember these. And they used cassettes, and they had 4 tracks. But that was it, 4 tracks. If you wanted more, you had to bounce down a couple of tracks onto one of the tracks. And obviously there's a bit of generation loss there. But now it's almost unlimited how many tracks you can have on audio.
Yeah, well, I recorded a song a long while ago, which is now kind of lost to history. But I remember layering up literally 45 violins just because I could. I wanted to create my own string section.
Were they 45 different performances, or did you copy some of them just to beef them up?
Oh, I played it through 45 times, but it was like slightly different parts, slightly different octaves.
Wow, I was impressed when Thin Lizzy were doing harmony guitars, but they were doing it with 2. Wow, that is serious. So was any of it folk music?
Yeah, so I think the music I started off recording was when I was still very much into the kind of pop rock type of thing. So I had my pedal board with making loads of terrible noises with my electric guitar, and was writing kind of pop rock type songs. And then I stumbled across Seth Lakeman at a festival, and he's a largely a songwriter, but writes in quite a traditional style. And he plays the fiddle and sings. And I'd never seen anyone do that before with a violin. So
I've never seen a singing violinist. No.
It's something now that I'm in the folk world, it's something you see quite a lot. But I'd never seen anyone do that before, because I'd been learning classical violin. And I just walked past the stage when he was playing, and it was just him and a bit of wood he was stamping on and a fiddle, and he was just making this massive sound. He wasn't even layering anything up. He was just like moving the bow crazy quickly and stamping out this.
Jimi Hendrix
this
of violin, was he?
Yeah, that's quite a good description, to be honest. But yeah, just totally changed my mind about what the violin was and how you could make music, and the fact that the things I liked about pop and rock and the kind of the real intensity to it, that you could get that out of acoustic instruments. So yeah, from then I started trying to do a bit of fusion stuff with electric guitar and fiddle, but eventually it's moved a bit more over into acoustic instruments and writing that way.
Geez, what a great foundation to be doing, a podcast about folk music. Folk on foot, to have such a wide range of musical experience and so many instruments and stuff. That must really help out. So let's talk about the podcast now. Now, you said Matthew Bannister presents it. How much input when it comes to working out who you're going to have as a guest and how you're going to treat it? How does that all work then? Tell me how it all comes together, because it's quite a for a podcast. It's quite a big team, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite a big operation. So Matthew works with a couple of audio producers, and between them they kind of book the artists, and they go out and do the actual recordings.
Mm-hmm. So you don't go with them remotely?
I don't. No,
Because I was wondering, you've got the choice. You've got a lovely studio, which is kind of where you've got everything at your fingertips, or you're going to stand in the middle of a field and do it. Okay, we want to stand in a field. I mean, the result is great. I mean, it's just they sound like proper conversations you'd have with someone going for a walk, which I'm sure is the idea of it. They really do.
Yeah.
But if you were coming at it where you have to do the work, I wouldn't have started there. I would have started like this, doing Zoom, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why was that you decided that it was decided? I know you joined the show, the podcast later, but why was it decided to do it that way, the hard way?
Yeah, I think it was probably partly because it was the hard way, and that felt like an interesting challenge. Natalie Steed, who is our audio producer, she's amazing. She's an absolute audio magician and makes the audio sound incredible. And she's won awards for her work on the podcast, like in her own right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think because we had those skills available to us in Natalie, and I think Matthew's skill presenting, and it felt like a concept that the work that was interesting. It was a bit different to doing it in a studio, and it just creates such a different atmosphere. I know we hear a lot from people who they either listen to the podcast while they are walking themselves, so it's like they're engaging in the experience with us on the walk. Or you have people who use it as an escape when they're on their commute and just kind of transport themselves into a snowy mountain or wherever it might be.
So you've got the audio producer, you've got the people booking the guests, you've got Matthew Bannister who's presenting it. So what do you do? I'm not having a go. I'm just interested.
Yeah, well, this is where the arts marketing comes in.
Right.
So I kind of look after. So all the social media all social media about getting the actual podcast out there onto all the digital platforms, getting it online, taking the videos which our video creators make, and kind of packaging them up for social media, getting them out there. I'm kind of the guy who shouts about it and puts it in people's ears once the creatives have actually made the thing. Yeah,
and that's how you get to win so many awards, because people are more aware of it. Yeah, and part of that awareness is getting it onto podcast radio, because podcast radio is all about developing awareness of podcasts, and that's what the show that I present, the Pod 20, is all about. So what podcasts inspire you? Because there isn't really many like Walking with Folk, is there? Sorry, Folk on Foot. There isn't any like Folk on Foot. So what inspires you? What podcasts do you listen to?
To be honest, I mostly listen to fairly straightforward interview podcasts.
Right.
So I listen to things like James O'Brien's podcast. The name escapes me. Unfiltered, it might be called.
Yeah. I forget the name of it. Another great broadcaster.
It's the YouTubers Hank and John Green. They do some interesting podcasts which I listen to a lot.
I haven't heard that. What do they do? What's their stuff about?
So they kind of made their name on YouTube and doing these kind of 4-minute video blogs, and they do a podcast where they just chat with each other and answer listeners' questions. There's one where John Green is an author as well, and he has a really interesting podcast where he reviews just kind of fairly mundane facets of the world on a 5-star scale. So it might be like Diet Dr. Pepper, or the concept of light, or just really obscure things, but reviews them in these kind of really beautiful 10-minute essays which he reads out. It's amazing. And I listen to a couple of music podcasts as well. There's the Listening Service, Tom Service. Nothing quite as out there as Folk on Foot, really.
Right. So you've got the digital marketing and all that going on. You've got the album out in November, which is called Impact.
Imprint.
Like I said, Imprint. So I've already got Folk on Foot's name wrong, and so it's why is it called Imprint then?
Well, as I was saying, it's this the thing of the people having the imprint on their song as they pass it down.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Now that makes sense. Okay, if it is like a traditional song that's passed down and they put their own little thing, they put their imprint on it. Okay, so this is your imprint. I don't know why I missed that when we talked about that earlier, but no, now I get it. I wouldn't have got the name wrong if I'd picked that up properly. Okay, so you've got that going on. You've got the album coming out. Folk on Foot is the podcast. It's presented by Matthew Bannister. It's a multi-award-winning podcast. What's next for Owen Ralph?
That's a very good question. I'm trying as hard as I can at the moment to not take on any projects which kind of don't have a clear end date at the moment. So I've got the album coming out, say in middle of November there's a launch gig in London the week after that. I also work with the charity Help Musicians. So I'm doing a lot of work with them. They also have a podcast which is very good called I Never Thought It Would Happen, which is kind of interviews with some amazing musicians, and that's done by Chris Difford from Squeeze.
Right.
So I'm kind of helping promote that. I'm also doing a lot of work with individual musicians as and when I get the time. Because the thing that I think the thing that's in common across everything I do is I really want to support musicians in their careers. Because I enjoy making music for myself, but I think there are far more interesting people out there than me, and who deserve to be heard far more than I do. So I work on a one-to-one basis with a few artists, kind of on I say when I get the time to do so. And I do want to keep doing that. But I think Folk on Foot fulfills that as well, in that we, as well as the big names we get on, we give a platform to smaller artists as well. Help Musicians is doing a lot, so much to support musicians in every stage of their career at the moment. So yeah, I just anything I can do really, which fulfills that goal is where I'm at. I do want to do a few more videos as well, like the How to Do Digital series. I just haven't quite worked out the concept yet, but it's something along those lines.
And in about 3 weeks' time, you're my special guest on the Pod 20, which goes out 5 p.m. on Fridays and across the weekend on Podcast Radio. And it's been great to talk to you. The podcast's called Folk on Foot. It's presented by Matthew Bannister, and it really is good. It's just nice chats with people. There's good music on there too, as well. A good way to discover some of the artists that are on there. Owen Ralph, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all. It was a pleasure.